You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guest about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Today, we'll hit the southern half of the globe, talking with Julie Cockerill from the Sydney area of Australia. Julie brings a depth of wisdom on organizational design, development, and culture as the head changemaker of Lemon Co. I recently heard Julie on a webinar focused on EQ and the future of work and was blown away. I really appreciated the humanity and the down-to-earth approach she brought to the topic. Embracing well-being and cultivating joy in both work and home environments, Julie helps clients to achieve sustainable organizational and cultural change. Oh, and she climbed to the Mt Everest Base Camp. I can't wait to hear about that. Julie, welcome to CX Passport.
Oh, thanks, Rick. It's so lovely to be here. What a lovely introduction. You made me sound really amazing. So hopefully I can do myself justice today.
Oh, I guarantee you will, and I am so excited about this conversation because I certainly heard the brilliance that you shared before, and I'm eager for the listeners to share in that as well. So let's start right off the bat talking about EQ. Yeah. I know EQ is an area of vital importance, but it's often misunderstood. And so I'd love it if you would just start off by helping explain EQ.
Yeah, look, I think when I think about EQ, and look, there's some great definitions out there, but I think, really practically EQ is really when a person with high EQ is somebody that really understands their own emotions. They understand what triggers them. They know how to manage their responses and, regulate their emotions. And, that is really kind of important in a corporate life, but it's also really important in your personal life. Daniel Goleman is kind of the godfather of this. And, I sort of first read his research probably in the late 90s, but he kind of talks about 5 key elements. So he talks about self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, motivation, social skills. So, the really good thing about EQ is it can be developed. So, there's absolutely no reason why we can't be, more focused on developing those skills in ourselves and in others.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and not something you hear a lot. I think of EQ as something you hear people, well, they've either got it or they don't have it. And I would imagine we'll talk a little bit about developing that. I know that when we think about EQ and we think about sort of customer experience in that, you have mentioned this idea of an empathetic style of CX. Now, I suspect that comes from a strong EQ. So kind of walk me through, how does EQ influence customer experience?
So, look, when I think about the best customer experience I've ever had, and look, I think if anyone's ever walked into an Apple store, you would have had that experience. There's somebody there that's listening intently, is deeply interested in the problem that you're trying to solve, is putting themselves in your shoes, and they're actively looking at the way that they can help you solve that problem. And ultimately you leave that store feeling amazing, having bought a ton of stuff, maybe that you didn't need, hopefully that you did need. But that's that empathy, right? That's that sort of authentic, deep caring, and the ability to sort of put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And you can see lots of corporate organizations are now, utilizing design thinking as a kind of great toolkit to try to bring some empathy into the way they design their experiences. So, it plays out not only in this sort of fantastic formal tool set like design thinking, but it can also just be in that sort of genuine understanding of what you need and how I can help you solve your problems.
I'd like to explore that actually a little bit there. So you're talking about how design thinking and empathy go hand in hand. We've heard that, but with design thinking being that formal to some degree, or also just kind of an understanding and a methodology, and EQ and empathy, how have you seen that kind of come together, weaving those two worlds together?
Look, I think what great frameworks do is that they guide us through a process. So wonderful thing about design thinking is, often you start with, just trying to get the question right. What is it we're trying to solve? Who is the customer? Who is the persona that we're trying to design for? Deeply understanding their needs, their sort of emotional needs, their product needs, what kind of situations they live in, how much they spend, what they want to spend their money on. So I think that's the great thing about a framework like that, is it kind of can force you into that sort of empathetic mindset. Now, what really helps that is when the individuals that are participating in that process actually have that really strong empathy, that they really care about their customers, that they're really trying to do good work. And I think that's, generally people come to work to do good work. Hope so, anyway.
Let's assume that for this conversation, we are going to go with that positive view. And actually, I do agree with you. And we could even go into a whole rabbit hole about employee engagement and employee experience and how that helps them do that. But actually, let's talk about that. So if you think of EQ being the thing that we want, and we want an environment that does exist in companies, and all the reasons that you described as to why one would want to have it, what is it about EQ? Why do you think companies struggle to create environments where EQ can thrive?
So, I think quite a bit about this, and I think, businesses are made up of people. So that's the first challenge. And people come from all different walks of life, backgrounds, trauma, non-trauma, education, non-education, socioeconomic environments. And so EQ is very much an individual sport. You don't have emotionally intelligent organizations. You have emotionally intelligent individuals that work in that organization. And so when people talk about resilient organizations, they've kind of worked with their people to develop those skills. They've worked with their processes to kind of build that in. So I think, the issue for organizations is always, when we think about EQ, we think about it at a leadership level. So we go, yeah, let's spend all that money and let's train those, those great leaders, and we'll give them some EQ. But we don't actually hold them accountable for it. We don't measure it. We don't reward it. And then the other thing is that, we don't go deep. We don't go deep into the organization. And I think that's it's a misstep. It's a missing sort of opportunity to go right through all of the individuals.
Yeah. So when you're tell me understand that a little bit. When you're talking about going deep, you're saying weaving it all the way through the organization.
Absolutely.
Oh, and I've got to imagine that could be pretty intense and perhaps more revealing than a company would want to expose themselves to. Is that some of the challenge there, that companies just don't want to be vulnerable in that space?
Look, I think perhaps the way I think about it is that, the more I can help my people develop skills in this area, the more they can manage themselves at work, the more they can manage themselves at home. We spend a lot of time in the office, a lot of time working at home at the moment. And, we are sort of combating our own sort of personal stress, our own, work stress, life stress, whatever it is. But what I think is really interesting is that there's some fundamental skills that we need in our business. And as we have been spending so much time, sitting in this sort of Zoom world, we're having to develop new skills and capabilities to collaborate online, to work through solutions, to be more effective, to be more personally resilient. And I think the more that we can engage people on, how can we help you develop those skills around EQ, that self-awareness, so you can actually actively participate in this new world that we're working in, it makes sense to me. So I think maybe the issue is about leaders being potentially fearful around their ability to manage all of this openness.
Oh, yeah. That's really interesting, Julie. There's actually a CX Passport episode. I'm going to fail on the number. but I was talking with Josh Ramsey, and he was very a key part of his point was talking about, fear, and if the leader has fear and what that looks like and how that manifests throughout just the overall employee experience. And I think you're right that fear could certainly impact the ability to take that EQ all the way down. So let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about employee experience, and knowing that a company may have this external brand, an external image that is delightful and appears that way. But when the internal employee experience doesn't quite match what that external brand or that external experience might be like, how is that a disconnect? How does that impact CX? How does that impact EQ? How does that kind of weave together in a challenge for a company?
Well, okay, that's a really big question, a big topic. And look, I love a bit of Richard Branson here. So, he talks about clients or customers don't come first, employees come first. If you look after your employees, then everything else will follow. Your clients will get looked after. The experience will be amazing. But often the disconnect comes when we're sort of active in a recruitment process where we're engaging them right up front. The brand's amazing, and then they come into the business and the bureaucracy's high, the politics are at play, and we've all been there. You've got your leader doesn't necessarily turn out to be the person that you thought they were going to be.
Right.
Again, we've all been there. But I think, there's a number of sort of fundamental hygiene factors that need to exist for an employee to feel kind of satisfied, right? And that their employee experience is consistent. And that's things like, am I empowered to do my job? Can I access training? Has my leader got my back? Can I talk to them about problems? Are they removing my barriers so that I can do my work? That sort of servant leadership piece. Are the processes to help me service my customers, are they really, really effective? Or am I having to do workarounds and be ineffective in my work? And then the things, that are really sort of a hygiene factor are things like incentives and remuneration. Am I being rewarded properly? Am I being incentivized to deliver, on the promise for the business? So if all of those things can be really aligned, and even if the majority of things can be aligned, that makes a really good employee experience. And then the outcome is obviously we get to do good stuff for our customers.
Brilliant. And that weaves together so wonderfully. And going back to our original kind of topic, talking about EQ and everything around that, it's so vital to have that as a skill. And I do want to explore a little later kind of what you said about how it can be developed. Later in the show, let's explore that a little bit as well, because I think that's so vital to the creation of this employee experience that you're describing, and making sure that it is something that is aligned with what the external appearance is, or the appearance during recruiting, and the internal realities. We've all been through that for sure. But I can't wait any longer. I just can't. I love hiking. I do. I love it. But you've climbed to the Mt Everest Base Camp.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Well, I got to tell you right from the outset, it was never on my list. So, okay. I've grown up in Australia. We love the beach. We love the sun. And so I love skiing. But I never really thought about that as a place I wanted to be, wanted to go, wanted to experience. And I worked with a couple of fantastic leaders, female leaders who had just come back from Everest Base Camp. And, one came back with that terrible cough that you get from climbing too quickly. And the other one came back and she was like, yeah, this is amazing. And I went home and I said to my husband, why don't we do this? He's like, sure, no worries. Let's have a look at it. We'll take some time to research it. And literally by the end of that week, I've got a spreadsheet. I've got all of the, the gear that we need. I've done a short list of, tour organizations that I think would be really good. I've worked out some dates that we could go, and here is kind of where we can get the flights organized. And I'm like, well, I guess we're going. And I actually broke my foot about 12 weeks out, and my husband said to me, I think we should cancel, or let's move it to April in 2020. So I said, no, I think we should just do it. I'm going to be fine. And look, I
Okay.
did. We got there. It was mostly very cold, -25.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
just, flying into Lukla, which is in this tiny little plane, into, a landing strip that kind of goes like that. And, one false move and you're kind of off the cliff, and they've got a
mm.
broken, smashed airplane on the side. And you think, oh, please, I need to make it. But it is so, you know, we're so lucky and so privileged. We live in these great countries and, great suburbs. I don't know poverty. I never have. I've been so
Mhm.
lucky. And what this gives you is this really beautiful balance of great environment, beautiful people, bloody cold. We were trekking through snow, just the natural beauty. And some of it was really hard. So, the cold at night and the breathlessness, and then climbing over rocks. But my God, it was life affirming.
Well, after a travel and an experience like that, I think you're going to need to hit the first class lounge. So join me here in the first class lounge. We'll move quickly here and hopefully have some fun. Taking Mount Everest off the list for a second, what is
Mm.
a dream travel location from your past?
Look, anywhere in Italy, really, but San Gimignano in Tuscany in
Oh,
Italy.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, incredible. Incredible. Yeah.
Did
I
you
would
climb the towers there? Did you get the views? Isn't that stunning just there?
Look, do you know what? For me, there's one moment where we're sitting at breakfast and the window's open and you have the beautiful Tuscan view. That is the
Hmm.
iconic postcard picture, and you just go, "Yeah, I'm here." Amazing,
You
amazing.
cancel your return flight home and decide to live there from there on. Yes, I have had that
I,
moment.
I so want to be back there.
Amen to that. Dream travel location you've not been to yet.
Look, I am really excited about Northern Europe. So anywhere in Scandinavia, or Poland or Northern Germany.
Oh,
And then the other thing that I really want to do is hiking in Bhutan.
oh, that's a new one. I have not heard that one on the
Mm,
podcast before. Wow, I bet that's going to be
yeah.
fantastic. I hope you get there soon. What is a favorite thing to eat?
Oh, I like a lot of stuff. But my favorite things are prawns, which is shrimp, and oysters.
I like both of those, and am now. It's, listeners may not know, but we're recording this in the U.S. evening, the Australian morning. So I'm starting to think about what dinner might be. Maybe it needs to be some prawns and oysters. I like that thinking there. What is a thing your parents forced you to eat but you hated as a kid?
Tomatoes.
Really
Ah,
interesting.
I'm still not a fan.
Interesting.
Yeah.
One of my faves. That's a new one as well. What is it about tomatoes? They forced it on you, and you just couldn't handle it anymore.
Um, Look, I think it's the yucky stuff inside.
Ah,
It's
yeah.
the seedy stuff. It's
I
it's
understand.
a textural thing.
Got it. Okay, that makes some sense.
Mm.
One travel item you will not leave home without.
Definitely a toothbrush.
Yeah.
And I've trekking through to Everest Base Camp, you get used to not washing your hair or washing your face, or so what I've learned is I can do with just my toothbrush.
Hmm.
But I love a Sudoku. I get on that plane and I immerse myself in the Sudoku, and then it's dinner time.
One of the things I like about travel is it does expose you to so many things and developing that sense of well-being through exposure. And I find that travel does that same thing, that gives me that sense of well-being. Aside from that amazing base camp experience, what are some other travels you've had that have helped your own well-being, or even are just amazing places?
Oh, look, I'm partial to a health retreat. That sort of total
Hmm.
immersion or time. I give myself a time out, and I am really sort of focused on just kind of getting back to basics. And I like to do that every couple of years. It's not like a regular thing,
Hmm.
but I love being by a pool. If I can go and give myself a lie down, and there's a swim up pool bar, and I'm drinking mojitos. I'm really happy because I've got that sort of blend of sort of relaxation, of reading time, and
Yeah.
but I love Fiji for that. It's 3 hours away. The Fijian culture is beautiful. It's a great place.
I cannot begin to tell you the depths of my jealousy when you say a sentence that Fiji is a 3 hour flight away. Fiji is a bucket list item for folks in America. It is the
Yeah.
once in a lifetime, maybe we'll get there, but to have it 3 hours, that must be wonderful to get there.
Look, it absolutely is. I mean, we're also 3 hours from New Zealand, right? And so, love the Kiwis, love hiking there, love the food, love the wine. I also love the fact that I don't have snakes. So you can hike and there's no concern about that.
Really?
Yeah, no
Oh, I did
snakes. I
not
don't
know
I don't know
that.
how that happened. Yeah. Yeah, we got all their snakes.
they,
Yeah.
they stayed in Australia and none in New
Yeah.
Zealand. I didn't know that. That's good to know. Something
Mm.
that may be a key show note here for sure. So
Travel to New Zealand. You will not get snakes.
that's right.
Good.
Sponsored by the New Zealand Chamber of Commerce. It is not. It is not. This is authentic conversation. So I know that you have and continue to help companies achieve sustainable organizational and cultural change. And you hear me kind of emphasize that word. I most often see sustainable as the hard part. How do you go about making that happen?
Yeah, and you're right. That is the hard part because often when we're doing change, we're on a time limit. We're going, okay, well, we've got to get that system in. We've got 6 months. That's the deadline. That's the project end. And I think, this is some of the challenge that change leaders have, that, there's often that bit after the project ends where it just goes back into BAU and
Right.
it loses focus. And then you come back 6 months later and they go, well, why was it successful? Because we had no focus on it. So it's one way, and that's about putting really good habits around it. So really focusing on
Mhm.
daily rhythms, good practices, good habits. And so when I'm working with sales organizations, one of the key things I do straight away is look at what are your operating rhythms? What are you doing every day? What's the reporting that you're using? Is it the right thing for you to make decisions on? So we kind of
Mhm.
start there because that's kind of the bedrock of really good sustainable behavior. And then we look at things like, how do we sort of understand where we're at from a sort of a skill or capability perspective. We do a bit of work on that, and then we will design interventions specifically targeting, the correction or the uplift or development of those sort of key pieces.
Mhm.
And then really we're measuring things like, adoption, resistance, and you're just constantly kind of feeding into that. But I think one of the big challenges for organizations is their expectation around speed of change. So if we
Oh
can
yeah.
kind of get real right up front, when you are dealing with behavioral change or cultural change, you've got to be realistic about what you can push into the organization, how fast you're going, and do you have the right leaders to support the program?
I, uh, I think I'm asking because I've just seen so many challenges in that area. It seems like there's a lot of great discipline and understanding around how to execute the tactics maybe of a particular initiative, but the change management wrapper that goes around whatever is happening inside the company, that seems to be lost a lot of times. So I'm glad to hear those sorts of things. Let's if I can, let's go back to the beginning. So we started with
Mm.
EQ. I'd like to close with EQ as well. And I'd like to get some tactical thoughts from you. Given the wisdom that you've got there, I'd like to learn, I think our listeners would like to learn, if I'm trying to create a culture of EQ, either in my company or honestly, you talked about developing it even inside myself,
Yeah.
what are some steps that I can take right away?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think, personal change is always the hardest. So change in general, personal, organizational, it's always really hard. And so often we start with personal change with a catalyst. Something's happened. There's been a disaster or, a piece of feedback. And so that can be a really great, sort of prompt. But I think, some of the things that are really just pragmatic and simple that you can start to implement are things like, reflection. I love reflection.
Hmm.
I use it all the time. Sometimes it can be a bit of over-analysis or analysis paralysis, but let's call it sort of reflection for now. But one of the ways that I use it is that I come out of my meetings and I go, how did I do? What went really well? How did I feel? How do I feel now?
Right.
And that's just a really nice way to kind of check in with yourself. So it's reflection, it's checking in, but it's also a little bit of learning as well. What can I do differently next time? And the more that we can do that, the more that we can kind of instill that little discipline. It just becomes a sort of second nature. And you could do that at the end of every day. You could do it after every meeting. You could do, journaling is a great way to build self-insight as well. What are the 3 things that I enjoyed about today? What did I learn for tomorrow? And I think, the thing about this is we want to be focused on sort of a strength-based discussion with ourselves, not a deficit-based discussion with ourselves.
Right.
Because it's the deficit stuff, that's easy.
Right.
It's really easy, right? And we get into the negative stuff, and then you get your, that sort of self-regulation has to really be strong to kind of you've got this sort of battle in your brain going on.
Yeah.
At work, buddying up with someone and talking to them about, how you'd like to develop this skill, I think is really helpful. Even if you're working with a manager, you could say, look, this is something I really want to develop a little bit more of. Can you help me by using some key questions after our interaction, and having a little bit of facilitation. I like that because I get to control how feedback is given. And then I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
Often people aren't ready to receive feedback. So again, that just helps you kind of be reflective, have the right level of information that you need at the time, and allows you to kind of regulate your feelings and emotions a little bit more. The other thing I really think is such a good tool is that we use a very few words to describe our emotions. We've got happy, sad, glad, melancholy, angry. And there is just a plethora of words that can help us describe how we're feeling in the moment. And you probably would have seen on the interweb, there's this sort of great Circumplex. And it's kind of really nicely provides some great descriptors around the different sort of levels of emotion that have underpinning emotions like fear and sadness or grief. So get that out and, print it out, cut it out, put it in your book, and then just, learn to sort of really describe and name your emotions is such a great tool. And then really the other one that I like is a breathing technique. So there are so many breathing techniques, but that's great at helping you regulate your emotions in the moment. So if you feel like you're getting a little bit triggered or you're about to be hijacked, even a simple box breathing, 4 breaths in, hold for 4 breaths out. And you can do that silently in a meeting and no one knows. So it's a great thing for just, again, regulating that emotion and just keeping the frontal lobe really clear for thinking.
I really like those tips. Those are very specific things I can do to help grow my EQ and my overall self-awareness. It's so helpful on the individual level. Now, thinking about on a company level, knowing EQ is an individual sport, but how can a company help support individuals who want to become adept at EQ?
Yeah. So, look, what we know about cultural change is it really has to be driven from the leadership level. So the executive team have to role model what kind of culture and behaviors they want to be driving in the business. Now, sometimes that can be a good thing or a bad thing. Hopefully, it's aligned to kind of what they're trying to achieve. But often what kind of kicks off that sort of self-reflection or EQ learning moment is, there's been poor performance in the business, there's pressure from the board, there might be poor engagement results. And so they're sort of forced into doing something. The ideal situation is that you've got fantastic set of leaders that are really interested in developing themselves, and EQ is part of that. It's a really sort of important foundational piece for learning and developing. So you really have to start there, and they really have to own it. So the ideal situation is that you don't have HR coming and going, you need to do that, or this is the way we're going to do it.
Right.
But they're sort of actively engaged in making the decisions around how they're going to develop it. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I really like is that sort of really strong change management approach. So, how do we get people interested in actually doing this for themselves? And, you sort of create a bit of a groundswell. Start with education processes. What is EQ? How do we kind of, develop it in ourselves? What's our level of EQ currently? What is the kind of little tactics that we could use every day? And the more that you can do that, you're creating champions, but you've got this wonderful groundswell that's sort of building up, and people are starting to talk about it and get interested and engaged with it. So I think that is a really lovely way to do it. I haven't seen that done a lot in organizations. So, hopefully I put it out there and someone's going to go, yeah, what a great idea. And then really the other way is to make sure that you're recruiting for it. So you're recruiting for it and you're measuring for it. And look, the upside is that if you're going to do the work around EQ and resilience and well-being, then recruiting people with that is going to make a huge difference, right? They're coming in, they can really support the process. The downside is if you bring someone in, you're not doing the work, and they've got a really low EQ leader, that could be, that could have a detrimental effect. So, but I think that's a really great way to do it. Get people in that actually have it.
I like closing with that. Actually, that is such an important part of a company's overall health and culture and everything aspect. It often gets forgotten because so often companies are recruiting for skill, but frequently they fail to include things like EQ, or in the customer experience world, heart for the customer, or other things that sort of fit that empathy and sort of self-understanding mode. And beginning to consider that as you evaluate your pipeline coming in is such an important part of a company being made up of a collection of individuals that demonstrate that great EQ. Julie, what a wonderful conversation. I am so thankful that you were willing to carve out some time to talk to us here at CX Passport. It has been a really significant learning moment for me. I love just being able to kind of get grounded again on what is EQ and the definition of EQ and what that means and what it looks like, the Apple Store example being a great one. I will continue to remember that, business is made up of people, backgrounds, and this collection of folks, but that EQ is an individual sport. I think that is kind of one of the mind-blowing sort of moments for me. And clearly mind-blowing for me is hearing about hiking to the Mt Everest Base Camp. And I didn't know the part of the story that you had a broken foot going into that. So yeah, what an amazing, resilient, and courageous sort of tough moment that was for you. So good on you. And then yes, maybe the last thing I should say here is no snakes in New Zealand. Awesome. That may be the most valuable nugget that travelers have been provided. No, thank you again. Helping us understand EQ, I think there are some really tactical elements that the audience can take away and start to apply in their own, myself included, in their individual lives, but then how companies can take this and grow this into their overall organization. So valuable, Julie. Thank you so much. Really appreciated having you on today. It was a delightful conversation. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Rick. It's been such a lovely conversation.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX for CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX for CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer, every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.